Hello, it's Bud. The other day I made a video about two-sided carvings, and I showed you a duck and a boy. Today we're going to talk about a cow, and I'm going to talk about a sled. So let's get started. Okay, I've done a lot of investigation as I went through this, trying to figure out the best way. I made a lot of sawdust and a lot of firewood. Not an extreme amount, but I learned as I went along. I found that when you take a piece of wood, unless it is pristine, when you flip from front to back, a lot of times the measurement is a lot different. Not because of anything wrong with the machine. It's more the fact that even a raw piece of wood from Lowe's or Carter lumber or whatever may not have the truest edge that you want on a board. So taking that into account, I used a planer and I made myself a true flat edge on perfectly straight wood. I went with poplar and I went with oak as my two choices. Now this is one of the rails for the sled. Let me tilt it a little bit so that you can see. I've got two holes drilled at each end. Those are in the last 3.5 inches of the sled for a block to span across the sled as my end pieces. They're needed for the carver to recognize the end of the board. Okay, now what you see is a step. Now I cut mine on a table saw. You could use your carver and do the same thing, but it would take a while depending on how you carved it. What I did was I took a piece of stalk that was oversized and I milled it down so that the thickness of the stalk was no less than 1 inch down here at the bottom. Okay, my height and your height may be different. I'll tell you what I've got on this so that you know. The piece of wood that I was going to carve is 1.5 inches deep or thick. So this shelf is 1 inch and 1 1/2 inches from the top of this board, so that it sets flush in this rail, or in between two rails, I should say. And what I've done is I took a piece of that particular kind of stalk and laid across here the length that I needed for my piece of wood that I'm going to carve. The length on this thing can be as much as you want. In my case, from end to end is 24 inches. And then I've got my 3-inch block here, and I've got a 3-inch block over here. 2 holes with drywall type screws to hold that piece in, and it sets flat on that bottom rail and just even with the top. I used a couple clamps to make sure that the two rails and the end piece stayed together. In fact, I put both end pieces in place, just loose, and I put a carving block in the center, and I used one long clamp across the center as a way to hold everything in place. And then I made sure that I secured both blocks on one rail, and everything was square. And then I turned around and put my screws in the other rail. What I found as I was doing my work and testing is a fact that maybe some of the old timers knew, but some of us newer kids don't know. When the machine measures a piece of wood on a sled, if you've watched the video in the educational section of the CarveWright site about the race car, you notice that there's nothing on it but the car. And that got me to thinking, how does it measure? The car being a little different, that's a different program within the system for education. I don't know that it's available for anybody else at this point. That's a side issue. But what I found was when the machine is doing its measuring, it measures from outside of one rail to the outside of the other rail. And those rails, just like your flat piece of wood, have to be perfectly parallel. Otherwise, the measurement it takes each time could be off, and that's where you get in trouble on two-sided carves. You make a measurement on the first side, and it measures one way, then you turn around and flip the board over, head to toe, so to speak, not lengthwise, but top to bottom. And if it measures different, then it goes into your scaling questions and everything else, and your pattern may be off. And that's where I made my sawdust. I had 3 cows that ended up, one side was larger than the other. I should say smaller than the other. First side is true. Second side scales to whatever it reads, and generally speaking it reads less, as on my particular case. But anyway, I made the sled. You set your carving piece in the center. You've already got the blocks permanently in place on the ends. The side that is towards the keypad is the critical side, in that you've got your block here that you're going to carve on, and you need about 1 inch beyond your wood, so to speak. May depend on how large it is, but as it's doing its measuring and getting ready to carve and ask for your bits, it's 1/2 inch or so, maybe less, beyond to the right of where it's going to start to carve. It's actually touching down just beyond where your project piece is. So you need a piece of wood the same height as your project piece to span at least part of that. And then you also have to do something to keep the project piece from moving from one end to the other. It's not going to move across because it's just the right size. You've already cut that. You've already made a decision on how wide you're going to make your sled, and that's the kind of wood that fits in it without having any other jigs. So you can use filler blocks, or you can use a track with adjustable stops on it to keep the piece in place, whatever. But you need a little more wood on this end than what your project board is in order for it to do the right kind of measurements and be able to come down and touch the wood and know that it's okay. Then it's going to move back just a little bit and start your carving here. But that's how I did the sled, and I just wanted you to see that. So now let's talk about the cow, and I'll be back in a minute. Okay, here's my cow, and we'll just talk about it a little bit. Now this particular piece of wood is 7 inches from left to right, and it is 6 3/4 from top to bottom, and the thickness is 1.5 inches. That's the reason I had that shelf 1.5 inches from the top. Okay? So now, this cow is one of the patterns that we can buy. It's called, it's milk cow and spilled milk or something of that nature, originally. Okay. Let me get this thing up here so we can see what we got going on. I'm going to leave it here. I mean, it's a little smaller than I'd like to have it for you guys to see it, but I want to be able to talk about it and know what's going on. The cow itself, I set at a depth of 0.8. That's how deep the carving bit is going to go. The height I set at 990 to give me as much perspective as I could get on this thing. And I've played with that. I've played with different things. The size in my case is from nose to tail 6 inches, so it fits on my board. Okay. And that's with the carving bit. If I display my, where are they? Just a minute. If I display my carving list, you can see on the front side I have the cow, and then I have 4 circles. Each one of these circles is set at a depth of 4/10. The size doesn't make that much difference. What I'm doing is I am just touching the cow or the land underneath. There are 4 of these circles around here. That's to keep the front in place because it's going to be the last thing to be cut. I cannot use my perimeter cut. I can't think of the right word. I can't use my outline of the cow and the pattern because the board is thicker than 1 inch. So I can't get tabs, even though we thought that, you know, if you make something on the opposite side, that it would allow it. That's true if it's less than 1 inch in thickness, but if it's more than 1 inch, then we're left to our own wiles at this point. I asked whether we could have the program modified so that it, you know, it knows we can only go 1 inch, so it would leave the tabs. But they say no, that can't be done or will not be done at this point. So we've got to come up with something else, and that's the reason I've got the circles. Now, if I look at my cow, I have a feather of 1/4 of an inch. That's telling you right here I've got a feather. But I've also got a draft, which you can't see there. There it is, up the top, the small draft. That's to give me at least something on the edge of the cowl for body. I don't know if it's doing me any good, but I put the draft in there as well. Usually we use it on lettering, but I'm just trying to do something to give me a little more body, possibly, with this cowl. But that's what I've got on the front. On the rear, you reverse your pattern, and I use the same depth of 0.8 and the same height of 900, the same nose to tail at 6, and both of these patterns are centered. You also see that I did the outline, and when I did this outline, it gave me 3. It gave me 1 for the cowl, and it gave me 2 down in here. You can see this black area here and the black area here. Turn it over on the front, you can see a little better. This area right here and this area here were also outlines. Now what I did was I clicked on the complete outline and deleted it. Then I set the other 2 at a depth of a 0.8. Well, I'm on the cowl. Okay, let's get on the back side. Okay, at a depth of a 0.8. So that piece is carved out, because that's actually airspace. And the same thing here on this one. It's carved out. You can't quite see. You can see here, it's going to go all the way through the wood. When both sides are carved, it's going to go all the way through here, and it's got just a paper thin edge around the edge, depending on whether you're at a true 1.5 or a little bit less. With a 0.8 on both sides, that's a 160. But it doesn't necessarily give you a true cutout, but it's as close as you can come, and the tabs on the front are what keep it from falling out. So it's minimal work with a saw or a knife or something of that nature to get the thing loose in that respect, but it doesn't fall out in the machine. I'll be back. Now this pattern I bought, and the only thing I can do is show you that it is not as full a body thickness wise as what the duck was, or as the boy was. Those have a lot of depth, where on a 1-inch board you can get those to pop out to where you have a lot of detail and a lot of body, so that when you put 2 of them together, it looks perspective wise the way it should. This cow looks like a sacred cow from India. The head is a good proportion, but the rest of the body is proportioned to a side view of the head, but not the way you would see a cow if you'd be driving down the road. He needs a lot more girth on the body. The head is fine, but he needs a lot more girth on the body. I tried setting my depth at like a 400 or a 600, and that just entailed a lot of saw work in order to get the thing cut out, and it also enlarged the head. I have not figured out how I can use a dome and make just the left side in this, left side in this case, pop out more and have the head where it is or in further, so that it would give me a better perspective. And I'm not going to play with height maps or anything else at this point. It's just, you'll understand as you do it, that it's a sacred cow from India. It needs a lot of food because it just doesn't have the girth that it should. But this whole process was fun, and it proves that if the pattern is good, like the duck or like the boy, and we had a good back for the boy. If you remember that video, I used the same pattern on both sides, so I have a two-faced boy. But it was fun. It was a learning thing, and it proves when we scan something on our scanning sled, that when we scan the backside and scale it exactly the same as the front side, we can do some two-sided carvings and possibly even some four-sided carvings within reason. But I just wanted you to see about making a two-sided milk cow and my perspective of how I made my sled to handle that project or similar projects within that size. I hope you enjoyed the lesson.